Welcome. Today we are going to be discussing yogis, sadhus, and siddhas. So these are words you don't really know, but the thing is we're going to be talking about religious people, mostly who are renunciates, who have left life, who are part of orders, and we're going to talk about the different orders that they're in and the relationship that Hindus have to these living teachers and gurus, and also how they continue to be revered even after they have died and moved on. So here we go, y'all. And we're getting started with our lecture for that day. In just a second, as my PowerPoint takes a second to fire up. Here we are, and we are off on our journey. So who's a yogi? We've talked about yogis before. Yogis are people who do yoga, but as I've said, they're not just your average person that bends their body around. They're in fact sort of itinerant fellows that wander about, that work, that don't really work, but that travel about and perform yoga, which is usually does involve some asana, body practice of body positions, but they're held for a very long time. And they're more into meditation and bodily transformation. Sadhus, sadhu just means good. So a sadhu is a good fellow. This is any sort of wandering renunciate will be called a sadhu. They may be in an order or not. They might just be guys who wander about who aren't a part of any order, but they are considered to be holy men. And siddhas are perfected beings. So a person is a siddha if they become perfected. Usually this means their body changes. They get magical powers. They're thought to have sort of incredible might and grace. There are also siddhas that don't exist in the world or who have left the world after being perfected that live in a place called Siddhalok, the land of the siddhas. So you can have a siddha who is a living person, who was once a living person, or maybe who was a living person countless eons before and now exists as an incorporeal creature who can come to your benefit. That's how a lot of people describe siddhas today. All right, so let's talk about religious folk. People or divinized human beings can be worshipped in Hinduism. These people might be living gurus and teachers, or they might be dead. And they might still be considered to have a great presence. So even after they die, they remain being saints and gurus that can teach you, that can bestow grace. People often will act as if their guru is still alive. Like I have one of my teacher's friend, his wife, her guru died when she was in her 40s. And I know they were living in a religious community, and someone turned to them or to her and said, "Oh, it's just so sad that your guru is dead." Because the guru of that order where they were living was alive. And she got furious with them. She was like, "My guru lives forever. I am devoted to him. He is always still here. He may have passed into another realm, but he is still alive. He is still teaching me, and his grace still falls upon me." I put a picture up here of 3 gurus from the 19th and 20th century that are in a specific order. So on the left, you see the gentleman who's painted, that's Ramakrishna. He was a bhakta and a tantrika. He was obsessed with Chaitanya, who was one of the guys that invented Bengali bhakti in the 14th century. Some people even say he was an incarnation of Chaitanya. He would have sort of epileptic fits in which he would have incredible experiences where he would experience the divine mother, and he would just call her Ma, who was usually Tara. And what happened was he had a number of disciples, but also he was very young and he was a Brahmin and he was married. So he was married to this woman who became known as Sharada Devi, or the mother. So after his death, she continued to be a holy figure, upholding his lineage and taking care of the sadhus that he and the monks that he initiated. Then up to the corner of the right is Swami Vivekananda, who was one of the great Hindu modernizers of the 20th century. He was a disciple of Ramakrishna, and a few years after Ramakrishna's death, he initiated himself and several others into this Ramakrishna order. They started the Ramakrishna Mutt and Mission, which is a system of monasteries and social welfare things that exist throughout the world and were very big for a long time. And he also initiated a whole bunch of of different swamis who were supposed to be in his order. Swami Vivekananda came to the United States and was the first swamis to do so. He popularized the word yoga and the word swami for that matter. However, the question is really, how close a relationship did he have to Ramakrishna? People that are really into Vivekananda say he was the greatest disciple of all. People who've done a little bit more research show that he was not around that much around Ramakrishna. But Swami V always said that Ramakrishna was the real deal, was like an avatar of God, an incarnation of God. So these are three sort of charismatic figures that are still highly regarded in the modern world. So even after gurus die, it still remain a big deal. I know people who are just completely into Ramakrishna to this day that have puja shrines to him in their home and consider him to be the closest thing you can get to God without God. So he's an interesting character. So here's some vocabulary we have. The word guru just means heavy. It doesn't mean anything else. Don't give me any of this nonsense of G-U-R-U. A guru is a heavy dude. He's a teacher, especially a religious teacher. People often say there's like, oh, this is my chemistry guru. Oh, this is my music guru. But the idea is whatever a guru tells you, you have to obey the guru. And one of the great sins in Hinduism is to sleep with the guru's wife. So stay away from the guru's wife. The guru must always be revered and obeyed. And a guru can be a teacher of scripture, to a teacher of the Vedas, to a meditation guide, to someone who leads a group, to someone who's your dance teacher. I mean, they don't describe a secular and a religious guru, but I hear Hindus often say to me, they'll say, oh, I have this guru who's my spiritual guru, and I talk to him about meditation and whatnot, but over there, that's my engineering guru, and I have the same relationship because he's teaching me engineering or music or whatever. So then you have this word sadhu. Sadhu is just used for anybody who looks, or anybody who is a renunciate. So like these guys on the left, you can call all of them sadhus. Sadhu just means good. A sadhu is a renunciate person who wanders. He's peripatetic. He wanders by foot. He's a mendicant, which means he lives on alms and does not own property, other than the few things that you see around these guys here, other than the clothes on their back, maybe a stick, maybe a trident and a begging bowl, and they don't have much. And they often argue that when it's not the rainy season where they stay in one place for 3 months, they never stay in a place longer than 3 days. Okay, so these can be formal sannyasins, or they can be people that have just like renounced. They're like, I'm done, I'm not joining an order, but I'm gonna go wander about and be sort of a holy bum and walk the earth, if you will. You also have this word acharya. Acharya just means teacher. So this is one who initiates you. If you were to like get the sacred thread in Hinduism, if you're a Brahmin or of the twice-born caste, you get the sacred thread. The acharya is the one that ties this. The acharya isn't exactly a figure like a guru or a sadhu. They often are not, well, they're not always renunciates. However, we talked about Shankara a bunch. They always call him Shankaracharya. And all of the people in his lineage call themselves Shankaracharya yogis and Shankaracharya monks. So then, to complicate things, you have a pujari. Now, a pujari is just somebody who does worship. This is a Brahmin priest who does ritual. These aren't gurus. These are people that know rituals and maintain purity so that they can work in temples and do these sorts of worship rituals for others. And then finally, we have the word parampara. This goes before that, or this after that. So parampara. So this means lineage. So the guru of your guru of your guru. In the academic world, I would say it goes me to my guru, David White, to his guru, Wendy Doniger, who read both of these people. It would then go further in. I believe, her lineage goes back to Oxford and to a number of people at Harvard. So it's just, that's the parampara, the lineage. So the guru of the guru of the guru, and you trace yourself back. Sort of like how people say that the popes exist in a lineage all the way back to the hand of St. Peter, who touched the hand of God. So the hand of St. Peter, the hand of God touches St. Peter, touches all the people who became popes all the way down the line. So contemporary charismatic gurus, these folks sort of exist. They're around, they're all over India. They were really big in the 60s and they became international. But in India today, we still have a number of charismatic gurus that I want to talk about. These are, all three of them that I'm going to discuss were renunciates and are renunciates. Some of them are still alive. and they give public lectures. They're thought to have performed miracles. They're thought to be great teachers. And for every person that thinks they're a great teacher who is a saint who can perform miracles, there's 10 more who says they're completely corrupt and in it for the money and are having sexual affairs with everyone. And that's one of the wonderful things about spirituality. Wherever you go, there's always gossip. And for every person considered holy, there's always a ton of folks saying that they are not in any means. So this is Satya Sai Baba. He's actually my Adi Guru, my first guru of Hinduism. John Grimes is a devotee of Satya Sai Baba, who recently died a few years ago. So Satya Sai Baba was really enigmatic and charismatic. So he didn't write a lot, but there were all these stories constantly circulating of his miracles. They were just fantastic. He also started an organization that supposedly was doing a lot of social outreach, but the more and more you look at it, none of the social outreach ended up doing very well. He was known all over India. He's considered to be an incarnation of both Shiva and the goddess. So in a way, people didn't talk about him as a guru. They talked about him like as a guru who's also an incarnation of God. What he was known for is he would go, wah, and like holy ash would fly from his hands. They'd call it vibhuti. He could supposedly manifest anything. What he liked to manifest most was holy ash. It was supposed to be purifying, and you'd get a little bit of it when he'd flop it out, and you could eat it and make you well, or you could rub it on your skin and you'd get better from your illnesses, or you could give it to someone who was auspicious. I saw him manifest, because I met Satya Sai Baba. I saw him manifest the ash, and it completely looked like he had crushed a cat and soul like that. So prestidigitation, the manipulation of the hands. He would also do things where he would like cough up a solid metal lingam that would supposedly be very hot when you grab it, which is an old conjurer's trick. When you look at a lot of the sort of miracles that he would do, they really do quite look like sleight of hand. But you know, my teacher John Grimes told me that he watched Sai manipulate a ring out of the air, just like that. And then he gave it to John. He said it was so hot it burned his hands, and Grimes still wears it to this day. When I first went to Puttaparthi and met Sai Baba, I had gone and I was really excited, and thought I was going to have this amazing experience with like my guru's guru, and I felt absolutely nothing. So this is an organization called Siddha Yoga. These folks are still around. They're in the 20th century. So toward the bottom, you see the guy making the OK sign, which is a Hindu mudra for good luck. Some people say it's man and God are one, and outside of man and God are the three gunas. Remember the three gunas? Tamas, Satyas, Rajas. So it's not the, hey, you looked, now you get 2 for flinching, and it's not a white power symbol. It's a very old mudra. So Nikki Nanda was what we call an avadut. He was a crazy Swami. He would wander around completely naked, and he wandered all over India, and then he settled down in a place called Ganeshpuri, just sort of the northwest of Bombay. And he got a big following of people who thought this guy was just an amazing teacher and a holy man. And you know, he didn't write down anything. We have some records of him and some paintings of him and whatnot, but when you go to Ganeshpuri, and I've been there a bunch of times, everybody has a Nikki Nanda story about this guy just being the most incredibly charismatic, charming, powerful, magical man who would heal people and do all sorts of stuff. And actually his organization, the Nityananda Social Service Organization, is still going and doing good work in that area. Well, there's this other guy named Muktananda. So Nityananda means he who is enmeshed in the joy of eternity. So Muktananda, he who is enmeshed in the joy of liberation. You see, pointing his finger here. Here's a little sterner. He said that he was Nityananda's disciple, though people dispute that. But Nityananda did give him a little place to hang out in a garden, and that grew to be a giant ashram there in Ganeshpuri that is absolutely beautiful. He wrote a lot, and his writings are quite good. He does have some sex scandals that came out a long time after his death, though there were rumors all the time. The question is, was he doing these sexual practices with his devotees of consent or not? It's hard to say. Nobody's real clear on it. And the other question is, was he doing this for sexual pleasure or to lengthen his life via tantric practices? We don't know. Regardless, he went on tour. He went all over the world, and he settled in ashram in upstate New York in New Fallsburg. And there was where he and his disciple, Swami Chidvilasananda, who's known as Guru Mai, she who is absorbed in the glory of the Guru, Guru Mai, she took over after his death. There was some hugger-mugger with her brother, but she took over. They had a female guru. She's very modern, very chic. She was big for about 15, 20 years. And then starting in the early 2000s, she started withdrawing and not having very much of a public presence. But what do we know about these people? They were known for what's called Shaktipat, the descent of Shakti, or the power of God and the goddess. And supposedly a look or stating a mantra or a touch from them would cause this descent of grace and divine power into people, and that it would actually awaken their kundalini, these sort of coiled serpent energy that rests at the base of your body, under your belly and above your genitals. And they would awaken that through the touch of the guru. This is found in Hindu scriptures, but it's not very prominent, but they had a whole theology around it. And I can honestly admit that I had some very profound experiences around Guru Mai in Ganeshpuri in the late 90s. So finally, this is Amritananda Mai, she who is completely absorbed in the bliss of nectar or immortality or of divine glory. She's also the hugging mother. She's just called Amma to most people. She's the hugging guru. She's a humanitarian. There's not a lot of stories about her miracles. Her big thing is that she's like, do good for the world. I'm going to set up a ton of social service stuff. And she has, and it's been very successful. She hugs everyone she meets. So when you go to meet her and you stand in line to have darshan, which is like when you go to a temple and you look the guru in the eye and the guru looks at you in the eye, she grabs and hugs people. This is unheard of. And she'll hug everyone because she doesn't even care about, she doesn't care about purity. She doesn't care about race. She hugs people. She has a big ashram in Kerala. Lots of people go there. I hear great things about her. I read a few of her books. They don't do much for me, but I like her and I like her agenda. So those are some contemporary gurus. You'll see on your left here, here's Big Bad Bikram. You can see the documentary on Netflix. He's the guy that invented hot yoga, invented it and tried to patent it, and has pretty much been fleecing people left and right for the good part of the last 40 years as the yoga bad boy. I hear his yoga is quite good. He's a reprehensible human being. See the Netflix and see him comfortably sitting in a long cloth with women around him. He has tons of rape allegations. Okay, so the three people we're going to talk about from the reading are the Arya Samaj, and that's an organization called the Gathering of the Pure. Then you have Sadhus who practice Tantra, in particular the ones that live in Tarapeet. And finally, the not Siddhas are the not Yogis, or the lordly Siddhas, the lordly perfected one, or the lordly Yogis. So for the Arya Samaj, they started in Bombay, but they're really well known and prominent in the Punjab now. They were founded in 1875 by Swami Dayananda Saraswati, pictured here on the left. And that really got going, and then he died within a few years of it, which is kind of common. They have this argument that it's back to the Vedas. Everything should go back to the Vedas, except they don't go back to the Vedas. My friend Dan always argues that sort of an Alabama Baptist fundamentalist would have a lot in common with the Arya Samaj. There's one book, nobody reads it. I've always sort of liked that joke. They were very much into a Hindu modernism, a Hinduism that was free from superstition and ritual, that was sort of conversant and congruous with modern life in the 20th century. So what were these folks known for? Well, like I said, they wanted to go back to the Vedas, but they didn't. They were known for using sort of Hindi and English. He originally, Dayananda Saraswati, started doing stuff in Sanskrit, but he moved to speaking in Hindi. And these days, a lot of their writing is in English. And they're very common in the Punjab, where they use a type of Punjabi Hindi and not the Punjabi language. We'll talk more about the Punjabi language when we get to Sikhism. So their swamis are sort of like traveling, lecturing chaplains. They write, they give lectures, they travel about, and they meet with the local chapters, and they give discourses, and they give these sort of discourses about sort of being good, taking care of the world. They were one of the first groups that encouraged widow remarriage, because usually women who were widowed would not be remarried for a number of reasons. and the education of women. They were one of the first religious groups to be hardcore about educating women. I wouldn't call them feminists by any means, but they did insist on having women's education to go alongside boys' education, though still segregated by sex, in a way that no other religious group did. So what are their beliefs? Their beliefs are either, and this is a phrase that Sikhs use, they say it's either monotheism or monism, and I think that kind of works. So they sort of believe in an eternal, extensive energy, and that is God, who is sort of formless. And when you die, you have a realization of that and merge into it. So they talk about reincarnation, but nobody gets reincarnated. They merge with the divine. It's revealed to them, and then they merge with it, and they merge into light and truth. God is truth and knowledge, and he is the source of truth and knowledge. So if you want to see God, you look to truth and knowledge. So, not only, secular knowledge, but religious knowledge, but their religious and secular knowledge kind of overlap. They say that all the source of everything is in the Vedas, but they don't read the Vedas and they don't work in Sanskrit. So, what are you going to do? They rejected caste and casteism, so distinguishing between castes and discriminating based on caste. They support and educate women and have widow remarriage. They support truth, dharma, and the benefit of all. So for their practices, they do a fire worship that's sort of like an Agnihotra, and the fire worship is called a havan. What do they sacrifice? Well, they don't sacrifice animals. They sacrifice sort of wood and herbs and maybe some butter. Even when they have their Hindu weddings, and I performed an Arya Samaj wedding once, they have a little havan and a little fire worship they do even in the wedding ceremony. So that's the big thing. They repeat the Gayatri Mantra, and the syllable Om are things that they do. The Gayatri Mantra goes something like this. Om Bhuvaswa Tat Savitur Varehenyam Pargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhyo Na Prachodayat. It's one of the most popular. It's one of the most popular mantras in India. It's quite old, actually. It does go back to the Vedas, and it's thought to be something that is just inherently good. You do it at the beginning of every endeavor, and it's supposed to inspire sort of wisdom and the sun and the light of the sun, and the light of sun is knowledge to come into one. So it's odd here that we read about this woman Miram, because she's a Hindu ascetic. So at this time, and when in the 20th century, there weren't a lot of Hindu ascetics who are female, and in the history of India, there aren't a lot. There's like Lala from Kashmir, and Mirabai, who was an early writer of Hindi. Both of these are like 14th, 15th century. But we don't have a lot of female sort of saints or female ascetics in particular. Our author Llewellyn opens her entry in Religions of Indian Practice with this passage from the Manu Smriti. The Manu Smriti is like the code of Hindu law that's supposed to be ancient, but is really kind of put together around the 9th century. So Manu writes, by a girl, by a young woman, or even by an aged one, nothing must be done independently, even in her own house. In childhood, a female must be subject to her father. In youth, to her husband. When her lord is dead, to her sons. A woman must never be independent. She must not seek to separate herself from her father, husband, or sons. By leaving them, she would make both her own families and her families contemptible. So for a woman to become a sannyasin, to renounce, she leaves her father, she leaves her family, she doesn't have children, or she leaves her children. She is not under the domain of a father or a child. She will be under the domain likely of the guru who initiates her, who is invariably a male. But this whole idea of renouncing it asserts an independence that is not found traditionally for women in India. So we have this woman named Miram who wrote a book called the Miram Atmakatha, which means the self-story of Miram. And you've read that closely. So I just want to go over some overviews of that. So she was born in 1929 and she was 18 in 1947. 1947 is when there was the partition of India, when the British left. India declared its independence, and India in the north half was cut in half, creating Pakistan. So she was 18 at the time when Pakistan was split off from India. So it was a troubling time. There's a tremendous amount of violence. Millions of people were killed as the Muslims from India, well, as some of the Muslims from India, because most of them stayed, went to Pakistan, and almost all the Hindus living in the west of the Punjab and up in the Pakistani area moved to India. So she came from wealth. That's sort of important. She didn't want to get married because she was interested in the Arya Samaj and she wanted to further the goals of the Samaj. And she wanted to go to an ashram. She wanted to go to this one ashram, the Vanaprashta, the place of living in the forest, where she wanted to go and dedicate her life to the Arya Samaj. So her family doesn't want her to do that, but they finally give in. She goes to live there, and her father sets aside a bunch of money for her upkeep. So whatever she earns from her speaking engagements and her publications or whatever gifts people give her, she can put right back into supporting her own travel and publications. After her mother died, and her mother said, "May you never wear yellow, may you never wear saffron, the color of a renouncer, while I live." After her mother died, she took formal initiation and became a sannyasin and renounced and stayed renounced for the rest of her life. She dedicated her life to public service, publishing, and speaking. Now, she was revered as a Swami. All Swamis are revered, but she doesn't have miracles. She's not a charismatic guru with sort of magical might or powers or grace. She was just somebody that wanted to support the Arya Samaj and dedicate her life to that and dedicate her life to making the world a better place. Okay, so now we're getting to something a little wilder and weirder. We're going to talk about the Tantric Sadhus at Tarapith, as William Dalrymple wrote so eloquently about. All right, so here is a pastiche of pictures of just people at Tarapith to give you an idea of what it's like. It's like a little village filled with, devotees and sadhus, and it's also a cremation ground where they burn bodies. So these Tantra sadhus there are ones who revere skulls, perform blood sacrifices, and worship this goddess Tara, who alternatively looks like the most sweet, loving mother, or looks like a wrathful, scary-looking, like Kali type figure. And of course, we're in Bengal. Tarapith is near Calcutta, so we're in eastern India again, where things get weird and wild. So what do they do there? They do blood sacrifice. You can see this poor little goat is not going to make it on the right. They revere skulls, and they revere this goddess Tara. You see her on the left. Often she'll have dismembered Shiva. Often you'll also see him having an erect penis as she stands on top of him. You see that she strides atop his very body, sort of consuming and taking blood offerings. So with blood sacrifice, one thing I want you to understand is, they kill these animals, but they kill them really humanely. Surprisingly, they sort of slit their throats, cut their heads off, gather the blood. The blood is given to the goddess, usually sprayed upon, sometimes like with a chicken, you'll cut its head off and spray its blood on the deity. Sometimes they'll gather the blood if it's sort of from a goat, and then they'll pour it on the deity or put it before the deity. But the other thing that people never talk about is after there's like one guy that cuts the head off, and then there's another guy that comes by and he grabs the body and then he takes it away. Where does he take it to? He takes it to a spot where they butcher the animal and they put it in little bags and they give you these bags. Sometimes they'll even cook the animal and serve it to you. So in Nepal, when they go to do a blood sacrifice, people will actually use the English word picnic. They'll say, picnic karnus, let's go have a picnic. And that means we're gonna go kill a chicken and eat one. So in many ways, this is one of the only times that a lot of Hindus will actually eat meat is after it's given a sacrifice. So it used to be relatively common in India and lots of places. It's becoming less so in this modern world where people look askance on these things, but folks that are still into blood sacrifice are very into blood sacrifice. And the idea is the deities that accept blood sacrifice, that's what they like. They like meat, they like booze, they like smoke and craziness. That's you have to give the gods what they like. So Shiva and Krishna and Vishnu, they like, vegetarian offerings of pasty grubbins and milk and whatnot. But Tara likes blood. You got to give baby what baby wants. All right, so who is this Tara? I've got three images here. The central one is very Indian. The left is very sort of Buddhist, very Tibetan Buddhist. On the right is very sort of Himalayan, Nepali-looking depictions of her. She has dark skin. In the Buddhist context, she'll be green. They call her green Tara. It's supposed to be the color of the color of jade. I've written this wrong here. She's common in East India and Bengal. We actually think that that's where she started, but she becomes very prominent in the Northwest and throughout in the mountains. Her name means star, and she's a very common goddess in Buddhism today. She's Pan-Asian. She made it into Tibet. She's even made it to China. She can be found all over the place as a Buddhist deity, but she's only really worshipped by Hindus in what we call West Bengal. So Bengal can be divided into West Bengal and East Bengal. East Bengal is Bangladesh. They used to all be the same place, just called Bengal. So she's at the same time a absolute divine mother and a fierce protector, but also a drinker of blood. She who walks the night and delights in blood. So this is an ambivalent goddess for us, but as we read about Manasima, she sees her as just a completely beautiful, perfect creature for her to worship. So who are we to say? Skulls. This is one of kind of the weirder things in the practice. There's been a couple scholars that have written on this, but the people in the area, they worship skulls. So where do they get the skulls? Well, they're these people named Doms. I talked about them a little bit. They're outcast people, and they do the funeral rites because they touch the dead bodies, which would make everyone else polluted. So they sort of gather these skulls and give them / sell them to people who want to worship them. And then what they do is they prepare them in specific ways, and then they often paint them red if they're going to use them as decoration. And the skull is the most powerful if it's from someone who has died in an unhappy way, if they've committed suicide or by an accident or by snake bite. And the idea is that the spirit does not reincarnate and does not go to the land of the fathers. It lingers around because it had an unhappy death. So these folks can do these rituals to kind of get the spirit that's still stuck dwelling around the skull and make them into tutelary deities, or deities that you can interact with and can sort of do your bidding. So you feed the skull and give it money and liquor and food and whatever you feed it. And that keeps the god or the ghost happy. And if the ghost is happy, then the ghost becomes like another little god. So what do they give you? They bring in good luck and they ward off bad luck. That's always the key. The 1-2 punch. Bring in good, keep off bad. Bring in good, keep off bad. All right. So you feed the skulls in order to gain power over the spirits, and the spirits will empower your mantra practice. So part of these, they have intricate rituals around this. So this is a Tara Pita, and Pita means like stoop or a stool, and Tara is the god star, Tara. So the place where Tara has stopped, where she hangs out and sits. It's a cremation ground. Now, cremation grounds are nutty places. It is a place where bodies are burned, but it's also a place where ascetics and holy people will go to meditate, not just because there are powerful substances such as skulls and bodies around, but it's supposed to be a place where you realize the impermanence of life. And I'll tell you, actually, if you go to a cremation ground, sit for a while and watch the bodies burn, it changes your head a bit. It makes you realize a lot of things, but it's also a place of great impurity and great power. It's thought that gods like Bhairava and Shiva hang out there all the time. One of Shiva's names is Smashaneshwara, the lord of the Smashana. The Smashana is the cremation ground. So these folks that we're talking about here have some resonances with medieval Tantra, which I'm just going to go over one more time, sort of as Dalrymple lays it out. So medieval Tantra is not sacred sex. There's tons of rituals, and they will do these sort of hardcore rites that involve sexual fluids, liquor, meat consumption. People actually do this stuff instead of having sexual fluids, you have a little like vermilion red and a little yogurt white that you consume. No, they use actual sexual fluids. You can figure out the white and the red on your own with no trouble. And actual booze and whatnot, and real meat. So that's this distinction between hardcore Tantra and softcore Tantra. Softcore Tantra, everybody just visualizes things and uses ritual substitutes. Hardcore Tantra, you're actually doing stuff. And so what we see here is that in these early tantric rituals and these hardcore rites, they would manipulate powerful sexual fluids. But where would you get the sexual fluids? Well, the idea was that these sexual fluids were gathered from the goddess, from her lower mouth, her adhomukha. And the idea was that the goddesses would come and you would consume the sexual fluids from either copulating with her or the guru copulating with her. The goddesses could be seen as descending into actual women who would function as consorts. These were often prostitutes, but often you would see that some of them would just be sort of employed by a temple as temple prostitutes. Over time, it's deodorized, visualized, substitutized, but you know, when we look at these people that are, you know, doing sacrifices of animals and worshiping skulls, there's a lot of that in the medieval tantras. So they're a throwback to that. Now, medieval tantra still lingers about in Kerala, Assam, Bengal, and Nepal, sort of in the outer fringes of sort of the Indian universe. Tantra still kind of goes on. Not as much these hardcore rituals, though I think they persist, but a lot of the ideology of crazy goddesses, magic powers, these sorts of things are still the current of these sort of, I don't know, wild lands with wild goddesses. Now, agoris are people who are often dressed in black. I hang out with them when I do in a couple of different places. I'm not going to be talking about them today. Sadhus and bauls. Bauls are people that are neither Hindu nor Muslim. They practice a sort of monotheistic mysticism of sorts and do sexual rituals. All of these folk still do secret sexual rituals that they don't talk about, but we are beginning to get evidence that these secret rituals are still being done. If you want to think about what is medieval tantra, I just think of it as yantra, mystical diagrams, mantra, lots of spells repeated over and over again, and then just ritual. Tantra should always be around ritual. Yeah. So if somebody says something about tantra that doesn't involve ritual, or if, say, someone like the rock star Sting talks about how he drinks special yogi tea and does hatha yoga so he can have, you know, sex for 18 hours or something like that and never ejaculate. Well, that's not tantra. In fact, usually in tantra, there's no dwelling on the orgasm experience in any way. And in fact, the idea of holding off your orgasm doesn't make sense because you need the semen mixed with the menstrual blood and female ejaculate to create the power substances that one will use in other rituals. So say no to Sting. So Michael Hellebeck, who's a French writer, describes modern yoga or modern tantra as a combination of bumping and grinding, fuzzy spirituality, and extreme egotism. And if you meet people that are into modern tantra, that sums them up pretty well. So we have these two figures that are described in Dalrymple. We have Tapan Sadhu and Manisha Bhairavi. Now, Bhairavi, one who is into Bhairava. Manisha is actually a snake goddess, but he doesn't get into that. And Tapan Sadhu means like the good dude who has a lot of fiery heat within him. So Tapan Tapasya means like heat that is generated through asceticism. So these are both prominent figures and they have many disciples. They don't talk about that, but they are. We know a little bit more about them than are in the book. And they're considered to be very powerful. They teach their disciples and perform religious services that include overseeing animal sacrifices, though they probably didn't cut the heads themselves. They would oversee animal sacrifices, and we see two stories in this. One of them doing an animal sacrifice they do an animal sacrifice for a lovely family that wants peace in their home and their kids to do well and do well on tests and whatnot. But then Dalrymple goes and he meets this guy who's doing a sacrifice of a goat. And he's a politician who made a whole bunch of money being a stunt coordinator in Bollywood, but he wants to get into politics. Politics are rough over there. India is a far more democratic place than the United States is. In fact, that there's just a bajillion parties, and they fight hard to win. So he says he needs Tara on his side if he wants to win on that. So that's why he's offering a goat. The interesting thing here is he describes this sort of scary, powerful goddess who will give him the power to do what he needs. Whereas, you know, Manisha Ma and Tapan Sadhu kind of see that about Kali or about Tara too, but they also see her as this divine mother that they're devoted to. So Manisha Ma was a normal woman who had a penchant for going into trances and being devoted to the goddess Tara. And then after she gets married, she goes into trances more and more and more. She has a bunch of kids. And finally, she realized she's got to go. So she goes and lives in this temple for 2 years. It's probably near her home, and she's going into intense trances and waking up and finding people worshiping her as an incarnation of the goddess when she was in trance. So she ends up meeting Tapan Sadhu, and then a little while later, she realizes the goddess tells her to go and meet with him, and he had been sort of living alone. He'd left his wife long ago to be a renunciate, and they get together. So they are not celibate, but they're both renunciates. And then together they do the secret sexual rituals, that they know, that Tapan Sadhu is slowly teaching to Manisha Ma. And Manisha Ma makes this really interesting argument how when she first got to Tarapeeth, she was collecting all these skulls and doing all this mantra practice and whatnot. But over time, she found that she was much more devoted and feeling this sweet devotion to the goddess Tara. And she actually feels that worship of Tara is best when it's tempered with bhakti, with devotionalism. So our last group are the not Siddhas. So we had Sadhus, Siddhas, and Yogis, and they are all of the above. They're worshippers of Dattatreya, who's a god of magic and yoga. He's their main deity, and also Shiva. They almost look like Shiva in the way they dress. And they also worship the founders of their lineage and the other important holy people. There's usually said to be at least 9 sort of great Nath lords, and they're all sort of worshipped by these Nath yogis, but they're also worshipped by sort of villagers and people all over. There's a great piece of research by Anne Gold, who we read a little bit earlier, who, when she was doing fieldwork in a place called Gatiali in Rajasthan, she found that there were Naths that were renunciate sadhus, doing their things, but then there were also householders who were Naths. These are people who sort of worship these famous saints who are no longer alive, who are not Siddhas, and they also have their own sort of traditions of sort of yoga and a secret lore, and they have some initiatory stuff. There's some wonderful writing about it in Anne Gold's book, Fruitful Journeys. So who are these not Siddhas? So not Siddha, not merely means lord or lordly, and Siddha means sort of the perfected one. So the not Siddhas were started in the medieval era, but they persist today. They still have ashrams, they still have people. They don't have a ton, but they still have a fair amount of Nath yogis. They were started in the medieval era by a guy named Matsendra Nath, Fishmaster Lord, and he is the one that supposedly invented Hatha Yoga, the violent exertion that reverses the winds within the body in order to create, instead of aging, destroying the body, time makes the body stronger toward bodily immortality and bodily perfection. They take all of the yogic fires that burn people into ashes and instead cover themselves in ashes and use those fires to make themselves stronger and more powerful. And Gorakhnath, or Gorakshanath, the cow protector lord. These guys are worshipped in temples. There's plenty of stories about them, and sort of all of these Nath yogis they aspire to be like their founders, and by the people that sort of revere them, they're considered to be sort of stand-ins for these founders. So they got a uniform. They're called the Kanpata yogis because they have, as you see this guy here, they like bore out their ears right there, and they put these big heavy sort of thing these big heavy sort of bone earrings in. Now a friend of mine who's an ethnographer was saying that they say that the boring out, the cutting of the ear to put those in, that's done when someone becomes a Nath yogi, is supposed to symbolize that they have perfected their brahmacharya, their celibacy. So it's a symbol of their celibacy. It's a symbol of their might. These are guys that instead of expelling semen through sex, they transmute it in their body and push it up the central channel, up the spine, until it comes up through the top of their head and rains down upon the brain, and is supposed to give perfection. So the idea is that instead of semen coming out of their penis, it goes up their spine and is transmuted into this divine nectar of immortality. So you can always recognize them by their bored ears. And they also wear a necklace that has a shell on it. This is called the nad. I see my PowerPoint corrected itself to and. Nad or nadi, the sound, the anahata nad, the unstruck sound that if you blow the conch, you can hear that sound. And that's supposed to be like the sound of the mantra and the sound that they meditate upon and the sound that is transmuting them in the same way as their physical yogic practices. What else will you see them? You'll see them wearing saffron. They do occasionally wear black, but mostly saffron colored robes, usually just a loincloth and maybe something draped over their neck. They wear wooden shoes. They maintain a guni, which is a fireplace, which is where, so they constantly have a fire going all the time. And then they give out the ash from that fire as sort of gifts to disciples. who come by and visit with them. So during the medieval era and further, there were tons of these guys, and they were great warriors. They headed up armies. Some of them were known to be power brokers. They would get kings to be their devotees, and then they would manipulate the lineage succession to get the people that they wanted to be the next kings. All the while, they would be getting money from all of these, or from all the kings they would be working with, to support their monasteries. So they were yogi. They were yogis as yogis. That's the kind of stuff yogis did in the medieval era. The Nat Siddhas is a revered lineage, and they worship the people within their lineage. To your right, you'll see you'll see the 9 knots with Goraknath in the center. And their name actually means sort of the perfected ones. So, or if it's Siddha, like I'm not, hold on, let me get this right. Okay, so you have Nat Siddhas. These are the perfected ones. These are the guys that through their practices of alchemy, through their practices of yoga, they become perfected, sort of immortal sort of magical, powerful beings. Siddha means perfected ones. Siddhas in general are thought to live on or in mountains. So are these Nat Siddhas. They're also folk heroes. So like people of Rajasthan and people of Nepal in particular, they go to any site associated with these Nats, and this is one over here in the mountains on the left, and they worship these guys to give their magic powers and support them in prosperity. So even as they're not in bodies anymore, they can remain as little gods. We have a number of Nat Siddhas who are involved with the VHP today. The VHP is the religious organization that supports the BJP. The BJP is the Hindu fundamentalist order, of which the current Prime Minister of India is a member of the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party. So that Hindu fundamentalist order has sort of like a religious group, is like the religious brain trust, and they still have a couple of Nat yogis that are a part of that. So the Nats continue to be manipulating politics in their own benefit as much as they can to this day. So the Nats' religion and their identity, and here's some contemporary Nats, and notice they're hanging with white people because why not? They had a cozy relationship with Islam, and a lot of these Nat yogis would have a Sanskrit name they'd use when talking to Hindus, but then if they were talking to Sufis, so mystical Muslims, or if they were talking to Muslim villagers or whatnot, then they would shift into a Persian name. They would go back and forth with that because it was more important, and these Sufis were sort of charismatic figures that had saints and whatnot. And the Nats had a thing where it was just like, wherever we can get power, we're going to get it. We're not concerned with Hindu or Muslim. We will be wherever is most effective. They were not into bhakti by any means. Some people accuse them of being atheists because they're more into yoga than they're into God. They're not into devotion. I mean, they worship Shiva because they want to be Shiva. They want Shiva's power to become Shiva. They want to become God-men. They founded Hatha Yoga, the violent exertion that transforms the body into an immortal body, from man to God-man. They were profoundly misogynistic. If you read a lot of their stories, they pretty much say that getting involved with women is the surefire way for you to never spiritually advance. Oddly, though, in the new Nat order of the 21st century, they are now initiating some women in. They're almost all Westerners, not Indians. And well, that's a whole other thing to think about. They do and did hardcore non-visualized tantra. You know, they do these tantric rituals in the tantric yoga, but they're not really into the sexual rites. They're more into doing sort of alchemy. So they are still perpetrating alchemical combinations. They are still consuming mercury and not dying. So they're doing this stuff. So alchemy led into gold, man into God, man. So early sort of chemistry experiments to manipulate metals that could be applied to the body as medicine to create immortality. Now, they were critiqued pretty often because they were way too cozy with Islam. The Hindus did not care for them. They were said to be so much into yoga that they don't care about God at all, so the Bhakta people didn't like them. They were throwbacks to medieval yoga and medieval yogis and medieval tantrikas who were kind of sketchy dudes and warriors. So they still represent that current that people aren't comfortable with. They're also known to be sorcerers and con men, which they absolutely are. I mean, they'll dole out magical preparations and they'll con people using illusion and whatnot, whatever they need to do. But you know, whatever you need to do to make it on the road. These are guys that are, you know, always wandering and living on alms. They need to do a little sorcery and a little magic, a little stage magic. It's not really a problem for me. So these are renunciates, and that's why I'm really bringing this up here, is because we've seen 3 modes of renunciation. So these are yogis and ascetics. So here's a big gathering of these guys, probably in one of their ashrams. They have a bunch of monasteries and ashrams still in India. They take sannyasin rituals, so they renounce their names, they renounce their families, they take a new Sanskrit name, and then they're off. They're on a new life. They do miracles and garner patronage. So if they can do miracles, which they were like Goraknath and Matsyendranath were legendary for bringing rains, causing hailstorms to screw people up, protecting cows, curing cattle of disease and whatnot. So they would do these sort of miraculous things, and that would garner patronage. People would then worship them and give them money and whatnot that would support their order and their lives. They're structured and landed. So they have actual monasteries, but there's far fewer of them than, say, the loosey-goosey agoris, who are just dudes in black who maybe have an initiator or not and have very unclear what their practices are. These guys have specific sets of practices. They have a specific lineage, and they can trace their lineage back all the way to Goraknath and Matsyendranath. So that was our discussion for today. I want you, the big takeaway to be these 3 forms, these 3 forms of renunciation. We have our Arya Samaj lady, who, so Midam, who is very modern in many ways in her renunciation and working towards social welfare and social benefit. Then we have Manisa Ma, who lives in a cremation ground and does worship of skulls and devotion to this goddess, but she was also able to escape her family and her parents, and her husband, though she's reconnected with her family, and I think even her mother lives nearby now. And she is a big religious figure there, and she has many disciples. And then you have these not yogis, these not siddhas, and they're around. And I've had and you can look specifically about the stories of one of their saints, Saint Alam. There are the Saint Mustnath, the crazy lord, and his interactions with Alam Shah. So it's over. Do a little dance. All right, have a wonderful day. I'll catch you next time.